It was a chilling morning in May 2021 when the sound of a baby's desperate cries filled the silence of the home. 11-month-old Lydia was found in her crib, tears streaming down her small cheeks, her tiny hands clutching at nothing. Her wails, filled with confusion and sorrow, echoed through the room. She was alone, hungry and frightened, longing for the comfort only her mother could provide. But her mother would never come. Just feet away, Caroline Crouch lay motionless, her young, vibrant life extinguished in an act of unimaginable violence. At only 20 years old, Caroline's dreams of motherhood and her future with Lydia were stolen in a single, horrific night. She had been a loving mother, always quick to cradle Lydia and soothe her, but now the bond they shared was cruelly severed. In the next room sat Babis Anagnostopoulos, Caroline's husband and Lydia's father, tied to a chair. His voice trembled as he told a story that would soon unravel, a tale of masked intruders, a violent robbery, and a desperate struggle to save his family. He described the scene with a chilling calmness, yet the baby's cries were a haunting reminder of the tragedy that had just unfolded. The sight of Lydia broke even the most seasoned officers. One officer, visibly shaken, gently picked up the crying infant, trying to offer the comfort her mother no longer could. The child clung tightly to the stranger, her cries fading into soft whimpers as the weight of the moment settled in the room. It was a picture of innocence and loss, a child who would grow up never knowing the warmth of her mother's love. Caroline's parents, devastated beyond words, would later recount how their daughter had been full of life and joy. They had spoken to her just days before, never imagining it would be their last conversation. Now they faced the unbearable task of grieving their child while fighting for the custody of their granddaughter Lydia, who had been left without a mother in the most violent way. As investigators processed the scene, they began to question Babis' account of events, his demeanor, the details of his story. It all seemed too perfect, too rehearsed, but in that moment, no one could have imagined the depth of the betrayal that would soon come to light. The cries of baby Lydia were not just a call for comfort, but a haunting echo of the broken family she would never know. A mother lost too soon, and a father whose true role in this tragedy was still to be revealed. Nothing was as it seemed. This is the story of how one man deceived not only his family and friends, but an entire country and even the FBI. Caroline Crouch was just 20 years old, a British woman living with her Greek husband, Babis Anagnostopoulos, and their infant daughter in a suburban home near Athens. On May 11, 2021, police arrived at a scene that could only be described as devastating. Caroline had been suffocated to death. Her husband, Babis, claimed they had been victims of a brutal home invasion. He said armed robbers tied him up, killed his wife, and fled with their valuables. For weeks, the public rallied behind Babis as he mourned his young wife. The police worked tirelessly to find the alleged killers, but it wasn't long before inconsistencies began to emerge. From a fitness tracker on Caroline's wrist to data from Babis' mobile phone, the evidence began to tell a very different story, one of control, lies, and premeditated murder. This case captivated the world, not just because of the tragedy, but because of the audacity and depth of the deception. Today, we unravel the events that turned a story of love and tragedy into one of the most shocking crimes in recent history. Caroline Crouch grew up in the idyllic setting of Alonissos, a small Greek island known for its serene beauty. Born to a British mother and a Greek father, Caroline's early years were marked by a mix of cultures that shaped her outlook on life. She was known for her vivacious personality and adventurous spirit, excelling academically while nurturing dreams of becoming a psychologist. Her life took a significant turn when, as a teenager, she met Babis Anagnostopoulos, a helicopter pilot nearly a decade older than her. Their romance began when she was just 15, and by 18 they had eloped, presenting themselves as a deeply in love couple. From the outside, their life appeared enviable. The couple shared a charming home in Athens and welcomed a baby girl, Lydia, who quickly became the center of their lives. On social media, their posts showcased a picturesque family life filled with travels, moments of joy, and unwavering affection. They were celebrated as the quintessential perfect family. However, the reality was far more complex. Caroline's diary entries, later discovered during the investigation into her death, painted a starkly different picture. She wrote about growing tensions in her relationship with Babis, describing him as controlling and their marriage as increasingly strained. She often expressed feelings of isolation, despair, and a desire to leave the relationship, but hesitated, likely due to emotional and financial dependence, as well as her love for their daughter. These struggles culminated in tragedy when Caroline was murdered in May 2021. Initially staged as a home invasion by Babis to cover his crime, the truth unraveled under police scrutiny. Evidence from Caroline's smartwatch and inconsistencies in Babis's account revealed he had killed her in a fit of rage, later fabricating an elaborate lie to mask his actions. His portrayal as a grieving husband quickly shifted to that of a manipulative killer, shocking those who believed in their fairy tale image. On May 11, 2021, in the early hours of the morning, Babis Anagnostopoulos placed a frantic call to the Greek police. The time was approximately 4:30 a.m. He reported a horrifying scene. His wife, Caroline Crouch, had been killed during a violent home invasion at their residence in Glikonera, a quiet suburb near Athens. According to his account, 3 masked intruders had broken into their home, bound and gagged him, and attacked Caroline. Babis described being helpless, forced to watch as the robbers suffocated her before making off with $15,000 in cash and other valuables. When authorities arrived, the scene they encountered was chilling. Caroline's lifeless body was discovered tied to the bed, her face pressed into a pillow. Near her, their infant daughter sat unharmed in a crib, oblivious to the tragedy that had just unfolded. Babis was found tied up on the floor, appearing to have been restrained by the supposed intruders. The image painted was one of chaos, grief, and inexplicable violence. The crime scene was meticulously examined by investigators. Initial impressions supported Babis's story of a robbery gone horribly wrong. The house appeared ransacked, with signs of forced entry, and items of value were reportedly missing. The alleged robbers, according to Babis, had demanded the location of the family's hidden cash and became violent when they couldn't find enough. Forensic teams collected evidence, while homicide detectives worked around the clock to track down the supposed intruders. The murder shocked the local community and made national headlines, with reports describing the brutality of the crime. Authorities issued a $300,000 reward for information leading to the suspects, an unprecedented move that underscored the urgency of solving the case. Babis's detailed account included descriptions of the assailants, further fueling the search. He claimed they were 3 men, all masked, with one speaking broken Greek. Media outlets widely circulated these details, calling attention to rising concerns about violent robberies in suburban Greece. However, as days turned into weeks, no significant leads emerged. Behind the scenes, investigators began to notice inconsistencies in Babis' account. Forensic evidence gathered from the scene did not entirely align with his narrative. Experts noted that certain details, such as the manner in which Caroline was killed and the supposed binding of Babis, raised questions. Surveillance footage from nearby areas also failed to capture any evidence of a break-in or suspects fleeing the scene. A breakthrough came when police analyzed data from Caroline's smartwatch, which revealed her heart rate had stopped hours before the time Babis claimed the intruders had entered the home. This critical piece of evidence, combined with Babis' increasingly questionable behavior, prompted authorities to take a closer look at him as a potential suspect rather than a victim. As the investigation into Caroline Crouch's murder progressed, Greek authorities began to uncover critical inconsistencies in Babis Anagnostopoulos' story. The turning point came from technology, a silent witness that couldn't lie. Caroline's smartwatch, equipped with a heart rate monitor, revealed her time of death. The data contradicted Babis' timeline of the alleged robbery. According to the watch, her heart had stopped several hours before Babis claimed the robbers entered their home. Investigators also examined Babis' mobile phone. Location data indicated he had been active during the period he claimed to be tied up and incapacitated. The logs showed movement and activity that couldn't have occurred if he were truly restrained. Further analysis of his phone calls revealed gaps and delays that pointed to deliberate manipulation of the timeline. Authorities began piecing together a different story, one that implicated Babis himself. The staged crime scene, which initially seemed convincing, began to unravel under forensic scrutiny. Items reported as stolen were not found in a pattern consistent with a hurried robbery. The manner in which Babis was bound seemed self-inflicted rather than the work of experienced criminals. The case reached a dramatic turning point during Caroline's memorial service on the island of Alonissos. Police, armed with irrefutable evidence, chose the public event to confront Babis. The timing was deliberate. They hoped to prevent him from fleeing. After the service, officers approached him and asked him to accompany them to Athens for further questioning. Under intense interrogation and faced with the overwhelming evidence, Babis' narrative crumbled. He confessed to the crime, admitting that he had killed Caroline in a fit of rage after an argument. He detailed how he staged the scene to make it appear as though intruders had broken in, tying himself up and fabricating the story about masked robbers. The confession shocked everyone who had seen Babis publicly mourning his wife. His portrayal of a grieving husband had garnered sympathy from the nation, making the revelation of his guilt even more disturbing. As investigators delved deeper into Babis' life, a clearer picture of his motives emerged. Financial strain was a significant factor. Babis had accumulated debts, and the stolen cash he claimed the robbers took was money the couple had saved for their future. His controlling behavior also came to light through Caroline's diary entries and testimony from close friends. She had written about feeling trapped in the relationship and wanting to leave, a decision Babis reportedly could not accept. The couple's relationship, described by many as turbulent, was marked by frequent arguments. Caroline's attempts to assert independence clashed with Babis's need for control. On the night of the murder, an argument escalated beyond words, culminating in Babis suffocating Caroline while their infant daughter was in the home. Babis' motive was not only rooted in control but also in preserving his image. By staging the crime as a robbery, he sought to deflect suspicion and maintain the illusion of a devoted husband and father. However, his carefully crafted plan unraveled under the weight of evidence and the persistence of investigators. After Babis Anagnostopoulos' confession, the case moved swiftly toward a highly anticipated trial. The details of the crime had shocked not only Greece, but the entire world. His once impeccable reputation as a pilot, a loving husband, and a devoted father now lay in tatters. The public was desperate for justice, eager to see how the judicial system would handle a man who had manipulated not just his wife, but an entire nation. On June 18, 2021, Babis was formally arrested. The event was broadcasted to millions of viewers across Greece, many of whom had followed the case closely, captivated by the unraveling of a tragic story. The public's outrage was palpable, especially after seeing Babis in interviews and social media posts, portraying himself as a victim of a cruel crime. He had been the grieving widower, the father left alone with his daughter, a man who had allegedly endured a traumatic robbery and lost his wife in the most brutal way. But now, after his confession, Babis was no longer the man he had once been. The once sympathetic face was now an accused murderer, charged with the brutal killing of his wife, Caroline Crouch. His arrest marked the beginning of a series of legal proceedings that would uncover more about his motives and the life he had kept hidden from the public eye. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed with journalists, spectators, and Caroline's family members, all anxious for justice. Babis appeared in court dressed in a simple suit, his demeanor cold and unemotional. As he sat before the judge, he seemed removed from the gravity of the situation, almost detached from the crime he had committed. His lack of visible remorse left many of those in the room stunned. Throughout the trial, Babis' defense team attempted to argue that he had been under stress at the time of the murder, citing pressures from his financial difficulties and the challenges of family life. They attempted to paint a picture of a man pushed to the edge by circumstances, but their efforts seemed to fall flat, especially as the prosecution focused on the details of the murder, the manipulation of the crime scene, and Babis' deceit. The prosecution, led by a team of sharp-minded attorneys, laid out the case meticulously, using the evidence collected during the investigation to paint a picture of premeditated murder. They showed how Babis had meticulously planned and staged the crime scene, using the robbery narrative to cover up his own actions. They highlighted his inconsistencies and the contradictions in his story. They also presented Caroline's own writings, which showed that she had been planning to leave him, adding weight to the motive of control and jealousy that had driven Babis to commit the crime. The prosecution's argument was powerful. They focused on the fact that Caroline's smartwatch had provided irrefutable evidence about the time of her death. The timing contradicted Babis' story about the robbery and murder. His phone records, which showed he was active at times when he claimed to be tied up and restrained, added to the pile of evidence against him. The forensic details, such as the way the crime scene had been staged, helped dismantle Babis' initial claim of an intruder. In one emotional moment in court, Caroline's family members testified about the woman they knew, a vibrant, caring, and loving individual who had been robbed of her future and the chance to live a full life. Their grief was palpable as they described the devastation of losing her in such a violent, senseless manner. They described how Caroline had confided in her friends about the troubled nature of her marriage, which made Babis' actions all the more incomprehensible to them. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Babis' defense team clung to the argument that he had acted under extreme duress. They attempted to present him as a man under immense pressure from financial struggles and the demands of fatherhood. They argued that these pressures had caused him to snap in an unplanned outburst, but this argument did little to sway the court. Babis at times appeared disengaged during the trial, refusing to take responsibility for his actions. His lack of empathy toward Caroline's family and his apparent indifference to their pain made it difficult for many in the courtroom to sympathize with him. His defense tried to argue for a reduced sentence, suggesting that his actions were a result of temporary insanity or extreme emotional distress. But these arguments were overshadowed by the premeditated nature of the crime and the lack of remorse displayed by Babis. After weeks of hearings and testimonies, the trial culminated in the moment everyone had been waiting for: the verdict. On November 7, 2021, Babis Anagnostopoulos was found guilty of the murder of his wife, Caroline Crouch. The verdict was a resounding declaration of justice for Caroline and her family. The judge, after carefully considering the evidence, sentenced Babis to life imprisonment for his crime. The life sentence was a reflection of the brutality and cold calculation involved in the murder. It also served as a message that deception, particularly one that robs an innocent life, would not be tolerated by the justice system. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read, with many of those present feeling a sense of relief that, at least, justice had been served. The trial brought to light not only the horrifying actions of Babis, but also the emotional and psychological toll that domestic violence can have on families. Caroline Crouch's tragic death exposed the complexities of abusive relationships, even when they appear outwardly perfect. Her family, devastated by the loss, expressed a sense of closure with the verdict, but the pain of her absence would never truly fade. For Babis, the trial marked the end of his freedom. It also left a question in the minds of many. How could someone who seemed so perfect, so charming, end up committing such a terrible act? The trial was a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and the truth often lies beneath the surface. Babis Anagnostopoulos' sentence was not only the culmination of the legal process, but also a moment of justice for Caroline. A moment that honored her life, her potential, and the future that was stolen from her and her family. The murder of Caroline Crouch shook Greece to its core, and the aftermath of her tragic death rippled through her family, the country, and the global community. What had once seemed like the perfect life, a young woman, a handsome pilot, and a seemingly idyllic family, was destroyed in a single horrific moment. For those closest to Caroline, the shock of her violent death, coupled with the cruel realization that it was her husband who had taken her life, left deep emotional scars that would never fully heal. For Caroline's parents, the grief was overwhelming. As the investigation unfolded and the true nature of her marriage to Babis came to light, their heartbreak turned into a relentless search for answers. Caroline's mother, a pillar of strength throughout the proceedings, expressed the immense pain of losing a daughter, especially under such tragic and violent circumstances. In interviews and public statements, she described Caroline as a bright and loving woman, full of promise and kindness. Her mother spoke of the unbearable sorrow of knowing that her daughter, who had been planning a future with her family and had a young child to care for, had been killed by the person she trusted the most. Caroline's father, equally devastated, shared his deep sense of betrayal. He spoke of his daughter's vibrant spirit, her dreams for the future, and the love she had for her daughter. Yet, like many in Caroline's circle, he had no idea of the turbulent relationship that had been brewing behind closed doors. Both parents lamented the loss of Caroline's potential, the future that was stolen from her and her child. Their public statements often reflected a deep sense of disbelief that the man they had once welcomed into their family could have turned into the murderer who ended their daughter's life. Caroline's family found solace in the trial's verdict, but justice could not replace the irreplaceable loss. The journey toward healing would be long, filled with countless moments of pain and questions that would never be answered. The murder of Caroline Crouch also had profound legal and social ramifications in Greece. The case became a flashpoint for discussions around domestic violence, with many questioning how a relationship that appeared normal from the outside could hide such darkness. Babis had portrayed himself as the victim of a brutal crime, a man grieving the loss of his wife and caring for their infant daughter. But once the truth emerged, it became clear that Caroline had been living in an abusive relationship, one that, despite appearances, had been deteriorating for years. The case drew attention to the often hidden nature of domestic violence. Caroline's family and later domestic violence advocates made it clear that there were red flags in her relationship that, had they been noticed earlier, could have saved her life. However, the control Babis exercised over Caroline, his isolation of her, his manipulation, and the fear he instilled, had kept her from seeking help. This case prompted a reevaluation of how domestic violence is understood and addressed in Greece. In the months following Caroline's murder, Greek authorities took steps to improve their handling of domestic violence cases. New policies aimed at protecting victims and raising awareness about the signs of abusive relationships were discussed. There was an increased focus on educating the public, especially young people, about the dangers of controlling behavior and unhealthy relationships. Support systems for victims began to receive more attention, and there was a push for stricter penalties for perpetrators of domestic violence. The media also played a significant role in sparking a wider conversation about the prevalence of domestic violence in Greece. News outlets reported on the case extensively, shedding light on the hidden realities of many relationships. Public figures, including politicians, called for reforms, and organizations dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence gained greater visibility. The case of Caroline Crouch and Babis Anagnostopoulos quickly garnered global media attention. The story was covered by news outlets around the world, and it became one of the most talked about cases in international true crime circles. The shocking nature of the crime, the betrayal of a woman by her own husband, captivated audiences far beyond Greece's borders. This global attention brought even more pressure on the Greek legal system to ensure a fair and just trial. The case was followed by people from the United States to Australia, with many watching closely as new details emerged about the nature of Babis' relationship with Caroline and the events leading up to her death. The case became a topic of discussion on social media platforms, where people voiced their shock, disbelief, and anger over the crime. For many, the case was a wake-up call about the dangers of domestic abuse, and it prompted a deeper reflection on how society often fails to see the warning signs. Caroline's story resonated with many women around the world who had faced similar forms of control and manipulation, even if they had never experienced such tragic outcomes. In Greece, the public outcry following the murder also led to a wider discussion about the role of the media in shaping public perceptions of crime. Some argued that Babis' media appearances, where he presented himself as a grieving husband, had swayed public opinion in his favor before the truth was revealed. This sparked debates on the ethics of media coverage and the responsibility of journalists to verify facts before reporting on a case. In the aftermath of Caroline Crouch's murder, her legacy lives on, not just in the memories of her family and friends, but in the conversations she sparked about domestic violence, control, and the dark truths that can be hidden behind seemingly perfect lives. Caroline's family continues to mourn her loss, but they also stand as advocates for change, determined to ensure that her death was not in vain. They have used their voices to highlight the importance of education, awareness, and prevention in the fight against domestic violence. As for Babis Anagnostopoulos, his actions and the horrific nature of his crime have left a permanent mark on both Greece and the international community. The betrayal of his wife, the murder of the woman he once claimed to love, will be remembered as a tragic example of the dark side of controlling relationships and the devastating consequences that can result when love is twisted into obsession and manipulation. In the end, Babis Anagnostopoulos' attempt to stage the perfect crime was completely dismantled by evidence, leaving a path of devastation and unanswered questions. What had appeared to be a heart-wrenching tragedy, a home invasion gone horribly wrong, turned out to be a meticulously planned deception. For weeks, Babis had convinced the world, including the authorities, that he was a victim of a brutal robbery, his wife murdered in front of their infant daughter. The shocking twist came when investigators uncovered the truth, revealing a trail of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. Babis' confession, though it came too late for Caroline, offered some closure, but it did not erase the pain. It was clear now that Caroline had been living in a toxic and dangerous environment. Her dreams of a bright future were crushed in an instant, her life extinguished by the very person she trusted the most. The betrayal was complete, and the impact on her family, friends, and even the broader community was profound. The truth that emerged from the investigation forced a reckoning with uncomfortable truths about domestic violence. How it can remain hidden in plain sight, how its victims often suffer in silence, and how the perpetrators can manipulate the narrative to avoid suspicion. For Caroline's parents, who had lost their daughter in the most heartbreaking way, there was no real justice that could make up for the years she would never have with her daughter, or the life she was never able to live. As we close this chapter, it's crucial to reflect on the signs of domestic abuse that were present but unseen. Caroline's story is not an isolated one. It's part of a much larger issue that affects countless individuals around the world. Domestic violence can take many forms, often hidden behind closed doors, but it's essential that we recognize the warning signs and take action. If you or someone you know is experiencing any form of domestic abuse, it's important to reach out for help. Conversations about unhealthy relationships, control, and manipulation need to continue, not just in the aftermath of a crime, but as part of an ongoing dialogue. Communities, organizations, and individuals all have a role to play in raising awareness and preventing further tragedies like this one. We encourage you to discuss this case, share your thoughts, and raise awareness about domestic violence. Whether it's through conversations with friends and family or by supporting organizations that help victims of abuse, every voice matters in the fight against domestic violence. Let Caroline's story inspire action so that others do not have to suffer in silence. Please take a moment to reflect and share your thoughts in the comments. Together, we can make a difference. If you found this true crime story gripping, make sure to subscribe now for more in-depth documentaries on real-life cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't miss out on future investigations, twists, and shocking revelations. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on all our latest content. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful stories to light. Subscribe today